Okay, tonight our main speaker is Mr. Dan. Dan, let's welcome Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm alcoholic. I don't know how that happened, but I am. That's the way it is. So when Kirk called me and asked me to switch, I was supposed to not come for another couple of weeks, and he called. He wanted to change the date. And he says, you can talk till 8:15. It's okay. He says, about 8 o'clock, a lot of people are going to leave, but, don't worry about it. Of course, he said, then we had this really good speaker here last week, and they all stayed all the way till the end. Thanks, Kirk. A lot of pressure there. But you're pre-excused if you leave at 8. That's all right. I'll try and get sober by then anyway. I had a sponsor. I moved here from the Seattle area about 4 years ago, and my sponsor up in Seattle, he used to say that the secret to giving a good AA talk, he said, you make them laugh, make them cry, talk about God, and say goodbye. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do all that tonight because, I've just got one story. It's the only one I got. You may identify with some of it. You may not identify with a lot of it. I hope you hear something that rings a bell. That's what kept me coming back to this place for a long time now. My sobriety date is October 17th, 1972. So I've been... It's been an amazing trip, It's an amazing ride. I found it to be such. It continues to be such. I keep coming back. I still go to 4 or 5 meetings a week usually. I'm very involved in AA. I'm very involved with other members of AA. I have a sponsor. I have a home group. I have a service commitment. The basic things I heard 46 years ago are still... they still apply today. That's what keeps AA alive and vibrant for me. I've got the attention span in most areas of my life of a demented gnat. So for me to do anything for 46 years is pretty amazing. I have been married for 55, however. But that's only because she was sick enough to stick with me during the first 9 years of our marriage, which were not real pleasant or real happy, as you might guess. Because I am, I'm a daily bar drinker. That's my deal. I started at 17. I was a late bloomer, I guess, by today's standards. I kept going. I was just shy of 31 when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And my life was enough of a mess by that time that I couldn't think of anything else to do. So I did not treat that woman very well. She kept having babies. I don't know how that happened, but somehow or another they kept popping out, and I didn't get to know them really until I got sober. Mike and I were talking about that a little bit earlier. I missed most of that. I did change an occasional dirty diaper, but most of the time that my children were young, I was out doing my thing. I was being hip, slick, and cool. In fact, I looked down on I had a next door neighbor. I got sober in California, in the Los Angeles area. We had a next door neighbor there, and he was so conventional. It was sickening. He mowed his lawn on the Saturdays, and he played with his kids, and he did all this stuff, and I'd love to just look down on that man. Poor sap, that's all the best you can do, I'm out thinking big thoughts in those bars, boy, talking with all those high-flying intellectuals, and we were solving world problems, and man, it was exciting, It was really exciting. I didn't notice for a long time that all that excitement was all up here. Nothing was happening out here. Up there, man, a lot of stuff was going on, One of the things I'm most grateful for is that in sobriety, I've had a lot going on out here, too. I'll tell you a little bit about it anyway. If I get, my wife told me when I walked out tonight, she said, get sober early. So, all right. She's heard the story. I'll try not to talk too much drunkalogue, but I was a full-blown alcoholic, no question. I was a car crasher. I think I totaled up one time, I think I crashed 13 of them. Actually, about half of them sober. Early sobriety was rough, too. But, yeah, and like I say, I was a bar drinker. So we got married right out of, I graduated. She didn't, but we got married right after I graduated. So I say that I knew this was the right girl because we used to party together my last year in college, and she drank right with me. I thought that was great. Then we got married, and we got married in October, and come around New Year's Eve, the first New Year's Eve now in marriage, and I'm looking forward to the big New Year's Eve party with all my buds, lots of booze. We're going to have a great old time, and she announces she's not going because she's not feeling real well. Now, I immediately, because I'm very highly intellectual type, I immediately figured out that what this woman had done, this devious woman had done, was to pretend to be a party girl just so she could snatch me. I was such a catch. And trap me in this hopeless, thankless marriage, and then quit drinking. I mean, come on. So I held that against her for the next 9 years. And I was not the model husband, let's put it that way. I did all the stuff that daily bar drinkers do. I got a couple of drunk driving raps. This is unfortunate because my career, I was a journalist, okay? And we started in Cleveland, then to Detroit, and then finally in Los Angeles. Everything is going to be different in Los Angeles, working for a big daily newspaper. And I was there. I was the automotive writer when I first started. Now, automotive writers are, they're good to have, but it helps if they have a driver's license. And when you keep getting drunk driving things, this interferes with your career. So, fortunately, though, things were a lot different then. I got my first drunk driving rap in 1969 and the second one in 1971. And believe it or not, the second one still, even that only cost me $300 and 3 years summary probation. They didn't talk about AA. Nobody ever sent me to AA. I don't know what was going on, but the only treatment program in Los Angeles at that time that I'm aware of, there were a couple of there was a place called Shire's Dryer when you could go shake it out, but the only treatment program was Schick Shadle at 21 days for $2,100. That'd be a pretty good deal today, I bet. But that wasn't where I went. My last drunk was not the worst by any stretch of my career. I went to my favorite saloon. As a journalist, by the way, as a newspaperman, we drank a lot. Newspaper guys drink a lot. I know there are lots of professions that probably drink more, but we drink a lot. And this was a time when a lot of reporters still had a bottle in the bottom drawer of their desk, At the Los Angeles Times at that point, if you walked in the front door, there's this wonderful globe lobby, very ornate lobby, fancy building. On the right-hand side, as you walked in the door, were a set of swinging doors. And if you went through the swinging doors, you were now in a thing called the Redwood Room. The Redwood Room was my saloon of choice. That was my home. It was where all the editors went, the reporters went there. It's right across from City Hall, so you get a lot of the city officials and the lawyers. I mean, big thoughts were being thunk in that bar, And an enterprising reporter doesn't want to miss any of that, of course. So I spent endless hours in the Redwood Room. And on the day of my last drunk, this is now a year beyond the second drunk driving, I was stopped off at the Redwood Room, going to have a couple of beers, watch the first half of the Monday night football game. It was Monday night. And I fully intended to go home after that. Now, my pattern for the 9 years had been, you don't go home after the first half. I drank daily. I drank at lunch. I drank in the morning. I closed the Redwood Room more often than not. But this time it's going to be different. I'm in trouble with my drinking. Life is not looking so bright. So I'm going to go 2 beers, first half of the Monday night football, home to my wife and family, right? 3 daughters. Well, I closed the Redwood Room again that night. I did get home and passed out for a couple hours on Tuesday morning, October 17th, 1972. I went to my favorite morning bar, a little place called the Sundowner in kind of north of Los Angeles. It was the Sun Upper for me because it opened at 6, and that's where I went to get well. I did a lot of morning drinking, did a lot of drinking alone. Anyway, I started my morning at the Sundowner, and then I just kind of meandered. Things were pretty hot for me by that time downtown. Things at work were tense. So I didn't go downtown to the Redwood Room. I wandered around much of West Los Angeles, and I wound up in Hollywood at sometime in the early evening of October 17th. I do remember I had stopped for a nap at a porno movie theater right across the street from the bar where I was drinking, because you don't want to get too far away from the source. So if you need to take a nap, either men's rooms with lockable doors or porno movie theaters work real well. Just tips in case any of you think of trying it again or something, So anyway, I got up from that, back to the bar, and I'm sitting in there, doing my thing, and I really don't have any logical explanation for what happened. All I know is I'm sitting there looking at this glass in front of me, and all of a sudden it hit me that, my problem is not my wife. It's not the responsibility of these 3 kids. It's not that my job is boring. It's not my parents and the way they raised me. It's not the religion I grew up in, which was hopelessly strict. It's none of those things. The problem is somehow involved with what's in that glass. So I called Alcoholics Anonymous from a payphone in that bar. They had payphones in bars then. These are things with dials, in case those of you So I called Alcoholics Anonymous in Los Angeles from the bar, and they asked me if I thought I could get to a meeting that night. Since I was an expert drunk driver, I figured that wouldn't be a problem. And they sent me to my first meeting, which turned out to be about 6 or 7 blocks from my home. And I walked in there drunk that night, and that began my career in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. There was a fellow named Gordy Anderson who came bouncing across the back of the room as I walked in, and he just said, "Welcome to A&A, brother." "Welcome to A&A, brother." And the room where I got sober it's a house in a residential neighborhood that a group of drunks had bought. So kind of a historic AA place, actually. It's got a letter on the wall from Bill Wilson dated 1946 congratulating the group for having started this Alcoholics Anonymous group in La Crescenta, which is a suburb in North Los Angeles. But I walked into there, and they had some wise alcoholic had managed to con a movie theater that was going out of business out of all these nice upholstered seats. So we had half the room was filled with these very cushy, kind of green, but they were okay, cushy seats. And the other half of the room had folding chairs, not nearly as nice as these are. There's metal ones and kind of hard, and you know. So me being the kind of guy I am, I apparently went right for the upholstered theater seats. And Gordy and others steered me over to the hardback metal chairs and slapped me down in those. And later explained to me that they really didn't like to take wet drunks and put them in the theater seats because they're a bitch to clean if you throw up in them, you know. And that happens a lot when drunks show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. So they slapped me down in these hardback metal chairs. I'm told, I don't really remember a lot about the meeting, but I'm told that I kept popping out of my seat trying to make a speech, which also sounds like me. And I kept on saying, "But I just want to tell them I need help." And Gordy said to me, "They know you need help, you know. They can smell that you need help. It's not a secret." The deep psychological advice I got in that first meeting was to go to work the next morning, not drink that night, go to work the next day, try not to drink all day and come back to that meeting the next night. And I did that, and I've been doing it ever since. I guess it was my time. I haven't had to go back out there. I know some people do. I hope you don't if you're here and sober tonight, because there's no guarantees. I've seen that a lot in my time in Alcoholics Anonymous. Guys that I've worked with, guys that I've sponsored. Mark, I remember Mark had a year and a half sober, and the light had come on in his eyes. He had begun to, this thing was really taking hold. He'd done his 4th step and his 5th step, and but then he had his life took a turn. He lost his job, and his wife was leaving, and he had wound up living in a guest house in somebody else's property, and Mark wound up taking one more shot of heroin, and he died with that shot. We found him in that place that he'd been living, another AA member and I, and he was on the floor, and he'd been there for a couple of days, and we went looking for him, and that's where we found him. And another fella that I sponsored, he called himself Bobby Lee. Lee was not his real name, but he had an alias because he was wanted in a number of places. And Bobby was a violent drunk. He really was. He at one point in his drinking career, he had working in a gas station, and a couple of guys came in, and they kind of pissed him off in the gas station, so he sprayed him with gas and threw a match at him. That's the kind of guy that Bobby was. Bobby was that way. Bobby got sober, and when he was sober, he was the sweetest guy you'd ever want to meet. We had him over to the house. He'd play with my daughters. They loved him. He was a great guy. But, he did it one more time. And the next thing I knew, I heard Bobby had murdered his girlfriend. He got her down on the floor and shot her in the head. You just don't know what happens. To me, that's the nature of my disease. I don't know about yours. My disease says that if I take another drink, I haven't the faintest idea what will happen. I figure it's probably not going to be good, but I have no way of predicting my behavior if I take another drink. And I don't want to do that because too often it turns out really bad. That first sponsor of mine, I got him. I had to really survey the possibles, right? You got to get the best sponsor. I mean, come on. I'm kind of a hotshot, right? I want a good sponsor. So I interviewed widely, and I finally got one. And he was perfect for me because he'd been strapped down on the funny farm 3 times. The last 2 after he was sober. He was crazy. Perfect for me. But he kept on hammering me on step 1. That was where we started this whole thing. And he said, "Do you think you got a choice? Do you think you got a choice?" And I'd say, "Well, yeah, it may not be a smart choice, but yeah, I've got a choice. I can reach out and pick up a glass and take a drink." He said, "Oh, you think that's right? Huh? You think you got a choice?" And I had to go back into the literature where it talks, it does talk in there, it explains it finally. It says that, for reasons that we may not really understand entirely, it seems that we alcoholics have lost the ability, our willpower doesn't work when it comes to alcohol anymore. And if your willpower doesn't work, you have no choice. So, okay, that made sense to me. And, an amazing thing happened. The minute I accepted the idea that I don't have a choice to drink anymore, that if I want to kill myself, I got to slice my wrist or I got to do it some other way. The minute I accepted that I don't have a choice anymore, I haven't had another drink. All the times when I thought I had a drink, sooner or later I did drink again. If I think that door's open, sooner or later I'm going to go through it. The door for me has been shut for a long time, and I'm very grateful for that because life has been amazing. It has been amazing. All that crazy adventure that I had in my head with all of the big thinkers in the Redwood room, came to naught. At the end, I was the guy. You probably have seen him. He's sitting on the corner bar stool by himself, moping in his beard, talking about, feeling very sorry for himself. Things are not going well. That was me. I drank alone. Even my drinking buddies didn't want to drink with me anymore. I was too depressing. So life wasn't going real well. The adventure wasn't living up to what I had up here. But I got sober, and long about 3 years sober, I went into a period where it was sort of, is that all there is? I've been going to meetings, I was not doing 7 days a week at that point. gave up Saturday nights because that became date night for this woman who had stuck with me through 9 years of drinking, and that became our date night. So on Saturday nights we'd do something else, but I was still going to 5 or 6 meetings a week, and my job was the same. We lived in the same house, married to the same woman. The kids hadn't changed, It was, and I'm full of the "is that all there is?" And I complained to my sponsor after telling him I didn't much care for him anymore either. That life was just kind of flat. And he said, well, I said, I'm not getting anything out of those meetings anymore. He said, well, maybe it's time you start putting something into them instead of looking at what you can get out of them. And that sort of turned my perspective around a bit. And I've been trying to do some of that ever since. And that's worked real well. Now, I was sober a little over 4 years. And mind you, my track record at work was such that when I first started there, my office was, or my desk, was in a different building than my boss's desk. And I was getting into trouble. I'm missing assignments and not being there when they called me and all that sort of stuff. So they started dragging me in closer and closer to his desk all the time. At first, I got into the same building in a cage, well across this big room. And then I moved into a little bullpen that was right outside my boss's door. And then he moved me into the desk that was immediately outside his door, all just to try and keep track of Dan, because Dan had this bad habit of disappearing when he drank, And my excuse was, well, I'm out chasing a lead on a hot story. I was in a bar somewhere. In any event, that was my record at the Los Angeles Times, right, after those first several years that I worked there. Well, 4.5 years sobriety, you think that change doesn't happen around here? Things don't happen? It's amazing. 4.5 years sober, that paper came to me and they said they wanted me to go take over the bureau in Moscow. And I don't mean Idaho. I mean the other Moscow. And so in 1977, my wife and 3 daughters and I took off for Moscow, and I spent most of the next 13 years as a foreign correspondent for the LA Times. And, this is a guy they couldn't trust anywhere outside of the boss's door. And now I'm in Moscow, 11,000 miles away, and I'm the only guy there, right? I've got, me and a telex, and I don't know what I'm doing. It's crazy. When they made that offer, I didn't tell my wife, didn't call my wife. I called my sponsor, because that's the way I was raised here. And I called Jim, and I said, Jim, they want me to go to Moscow. He said, oh, wow. I said, that's kind of, a couple of weeks? I said, no, 2 years. 2 years, he said. Wow. He says, that's way too crazy to be your will. It must be God's will. And off we went. As I say, the next 13 years, most of that time we were overseas. We were in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and covering a lot of really interesting stories that were going on. I was in Eastern Europe when the Berlin Wall came down, and I was working a lot around all of that sort of stuff. And it was an amazing time. And we had, we traveled as a family for much of that time. Our daughters, when they got to be college age, came back to the States, but we were still living overseas. 4+ years in Jerusalem and a couple of years in London, and it was just an amazing ride. And then, there's no sadder people I've ever met than old foreign correspondents. So back we came finally, but I got into the digital journalism age in a very, very early stage, and that later on led to a job at Microsoft. And so we went up, that's how we got to Seattle, and went up to Microsoft and worked there. And all this time, as I say, well, in Moscow in 1977, I have to say, AA was not all that popular. They didn't like secret societies, anonymous. They weren't real big on God and spiritual things. So it was a little tense there at times. There weren't meetings. We did get a little group going there of foreigners. There was a lady who was the wife of the Austrian Airlines guy managing the office in Moscow, and there were a couple of New Zealand Seabees who were doing some construction work on the New Zealand embassy there, and there was a guy from Colombia. His name was Juvenal Infante, and Juve had a problem. He'd go to these diplomatic dinners and pass out in his soup, and that wasn't endearing him to his people. So anyway, through a connection at the American Embassy, the doctor there, who was a friend, put us together. So at the max, we had 4.5 people. The wife of the Irish ambassador briefly thought she might be alcoholic, but quickly felt better about that and decided she wasn't. So she didn't stick around. But in Poland, we got a group started. There was an English-speaking group in Warsaw that we got going, so that was good. And there was AA in Israel is kind of weird because the Israeli government at that time anyway was not real big on proselytization, and since AA was considered to be a Christian organization mainly, they weren't real happy about AA. They didn't stop it, so we had a group in Jerusalem but it was so small that it expanded to all kinds of other things. We had Emotions Anonymous, we had Al-Anon, we had AA, and we had Narcotics Anonymous, and we all met together. There were only like 10 or 12 of us, and we had this distribution of different ailments, which made for some interesting meetings. It was fun. So anyway, back in the United States, I'm grateful for all that time overseas. I was obsessed with my work. I was scared to death. I didn't know how to spell foreign correspondent, and here I was one. It was very scary, and I was obsessed with the job. Somehow or another, despite that, I did manage to stay sober through all that time, and I'm still kind of astonished at that because it was kind of high pressure work sometimes. There wasn't the support group around that you get used to here. So when I got back to the States and was able to get back into a home group again and live what I think of as a much more normal AA life, I was very grateful for that. And I guess 2 lessons come to me out of that. One is that this program is powerful enough that if you ever do find yourself in a place where there aren't meetings and there aren't that kind of support around, you can still stay sober. I know that. On the other hand, I also know that this experience of living as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous is fabulously richer when you've got the support of all the rest of us around. I'm a very big believer in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. God and I still have differences sometimes, but we're cruising along in there and we're figuring it all out. Meanwhile, I love the men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a kind of a master gratitude list at home that I put together some time ago, and when I was feeling sorry for myself about something. That still happens, by the way. So I decided instead of trying to do a gratitude list every day and you do the same 5 things every day, or at least 4 of them are the same, I just decided, I really need was a lifetime gratitude list. So I started working on this thing, and I've got it, and I pull it out every now and then when things don't seem to be going my way. But one of the big features on there are probably 70 names of men in Alcoholics Anonymous that either have been my sponsor or that I have sponsored over the years. Some of them still here. Some of them got drunk. Some of them are still sober. I've got AA friends that have been in my life for now well over 40 years. There's one who's coming to visit us next month, actually, and another one who I just visited in Los Angeles not too long ago when I was there for the oldest granddaughter's graduation from University of Southern California. Amazing. Particularly when I remember that when her mother was, I think, 8, maybe 7. She was the middle daughter of our 3 daughters, and her older sister 8, and then the youngest one was about 4. And I'm still drinking, and I gathered this clan in the family room of our home in Los Angeles at that time, and announced that I was going to do the noble thing and I was going to leave. I think they call that child abandonment or something, but to me it was doing the noble thing. I had caused so much problem and heartache and pain in this family that to me it seemed logical that if I left they'd be better off. They all cried, I cried. I got on my motorcycle and I whipped out the driveway. I made it about 2.5 miles. In my head, I was going to Colorado. I have no idea why I was going to Colorado. Eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. No idea why that was in my head, but it was. I made it about 3 miles to a saloon called Up the Hill, and I stopped in there for a little refreshment. And I spent the rest of the day there. Wound up calling my father on the phone. He was in Michigan, I was in California. And he just said, if you go home, I'll come out and see if I can help. Well, I did go home, much to my wife's distress by then. My dad came out. He didn't solve I still had another year or 2 of drinking to do. But, that family that came that close to breaking up entirely is still together and quite close today. Those daughters are now, the oldest one is going to be 55 in August. Our middle sister is going to be 54 in August. The youngest one, the baby's 51. I don't know how that happens. I'm 77. How in the hell did that happen? I don't know. But somehow it happened, and it's been a rich and wonderful 46 years, and I look forward to more of them. I really would like to make 50 years sober. I think that would be cool. But we'll see, I don't know. I got no guarantees. I can keep doing the stuff that I've been doing. I keep meeting with these guys that are so important in my life. I've got 2 new ones, and they're kind of fun. One is a minister, and the other's an atheist. Oh, we're having a great time. It really gets interesting, it really does. If you just, there isn't a whole lot to this thing. I mean, you don't drink. You don't drink and you show up and you try and pay attention to what's going on around you. And that to me is the spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening to me is basically the feeling of being connected to my life, connected to the world around me, connected to the universe somehow. I don't know how, but feeling connected. And I never felt that. I was the kid, I was the professor, they called me in school. I got straight A's, and other kids were good at ball and playing football and baseball and otherwise. I was, 89 pounds. I went out for quarterback. Oh, good. That was painful. I just didn't fit. I didn't fit anywhere, it didn't seem. I don't know, I was probably 6 or 7, 8, I don't know, something like that, and I went looking in my parents' closet for the adoption certificate, because I was certain that I didn't really belong to these people. So I don't know where that comes from, where that feeling of being an alien comes from. I've met a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who have felt much that same way, though. So apparently that may be part of at least the disease that I have. But now I don't. I feel connected. I feel pretty comfortable almost anywhere I go, almost anything I do. I don't get scared anymore. I don't feel out of place. I can talk to most anybody. I don't know. I fit in the world. It's nice. I love it. And if you're new or old, I hope you stay. We're going to have fun together. Thanks.
One more time for Dan. What do you think? Yeah. All right. So this has been a regular meeting of the Rarely Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're cordially invited to join us again next week, and please bring a friend. There are approximately 100 meetings of AA each week in the Prescott area. We advise that you attend as many as possible, and we hope that you'll join us again soon. After the prayer, will the people who volunteered to do stuff do that stuff. And your court cards are on the back table. Let's circle up and say the Lord's Prayer.